Izuminokami Kanesada and his faithful companion, Horikawa Kunihiro, travel through time to important historical points. They have to protect them from the Time Retrograde Army, who want to change history and make it have different results to gain more power in the future. They're both expert swordsmen, especially Kane, who's been in this job for a long time and is Harakawa's guide in his early jobs. They traveled with a talking robot cat named Konosuke. It offers all the mission data and analyzes the changes in the story regarding their actions. On their first mission, they must travel to fix a time warp and protect the history of the Retrograde Army. They both arrive from the time jump and stay at an inn for the night. The night, a fire breaks out in the city center, and Kane and Harakawa go to help since the Time Retrograde Army could be behind it. When they arrive, Kane and Harakawa begin fighting several soldiers from the enemy army. However, they're outnumbered and need some help fighting. Suddenly, a mysterious figure appears who turns out to be Saniwa, Kane's master. He arrives to help and summons 3 more soldiers to even the battlefield. When Saniwa summons the other soldiers to fight, they finish off the remaining members of the Retrograde Army. However, they warn that in a few days they'll return. After the battle, Saniwa introduces Tonbokiri, Yoshiyuki, and Yagen, some of the mightiest members of his unit. Saniwa summons them to help Kane in future missions as the Retrograde Army gains more ground daily. When Saniwa introduces them, he tells them to obey Kane and puts all of his faith in them. The following day, they all get to know each other. Their swords in human bodies, and Saniwa forges them. Kane outlines the plan and sends Yoshiyuki and Tonbokiri to investigate a steamship for information on the Retrograde Army. Meanwhile, Yagen goes to investigate around town to find more intel. After they start their work, Kane and Harakawa try to figure out what the enemy plans to do. They conclude that they plan to attack the foreign ship to change the course of history. They ran to the boat, but it was too late because an explosion had hit the ship. Although the boat explodes, Yoshiyuki and Tonbokiri are there to help the passengers. Later, Yoshiyuki gets annoyed with Kane because he thinks he doesn't care about the number of victims, just that the story course wasn't affected. Because of his annoyance, Yoshiyuki goes to the forest and angry Kane wants to find him. But Harakawa stops and tells him that he'll do it while Kane continues to investigate the Retrograde Army's plan. Kane agrees but warns him to keep an eye out for enemy movements. Harakawa finds Yoshiyuki and the two talk for a while. They also investigate a group of samurai that the Retrograde Army wanted to attack and change history. History dictated that the police would catch these samurai, so the Retrograde Army tried to prevent it. Kane also finds this out and, along with Yagen and Tonbokiri, go to help each other. The group of heroes appear to defeat the Retrograde Army and they help the police to catch the samurai. When they beat them, history doesn't change and the mission's complete. The group reunites after the victory and Yoshiyuki apologizes to Kane. Konosuke tells them the next time they skip will be in 3 days and that they have to be ready. The next mission for the heroes is to monitor a negotiation between nations, and if the Retrograde Army sought to meddle, they have to be stopped at all costs. After several days of investigating, Konosuke discovers an anomaly in history. That's why the group, except Yagen, who had the order to follow the negotiations closely, went to see what was happening. They meet a mighty warrior from the Retrograde Army. His power was so great that not even the 4 of them together could defeat him. Kane says that he only needs to be detained for an hour, so it doesn't affect the course of the story. So Tonbokiri and Harakawa stay behind to hold him off while the others head to where the agreements are taking place. Meanwhile, Yagen discovers that the anomaly in the story is due to external enemies seeking to blow the negotiations. They plan to assassinate everyone involved by firing several cannons from a ship. Yagen gets on board the vessel and prevents the guns from being fired. Suddenly, several soldiers from the Retrograde Army appear to finish him off. When Yagen's on the brink of death, a mysterious ally shows up to save him. The person who came to help Yagen is Tsurumaro, sent by Saniwa to help Unit 2. When Tsurumaro appears, he quickly kills the enemies on the ship, saving Yagen and giving Yoshiyuki and Kane time to reach the boat. Meanwhile, in the village, Tonbokiri and Harakawa are still fighting against the mighty warrior. However, they notice he doesn't attack with all his power and begin thinking he has another objective. When the negotiations are over, one of the ministers goes to where Tonbokiri and the enemies are fighting. The warrior tries to attack him upon seeing him, but Tonbokiri stops him. He climbs a tower and sends a signal to his companions on the high seas. On shore, the ship party notices the Retrograde Army preparing a cannon attack from a ship. Although they manage to stop part of the attack, several cannons hit the city. However, they avoid even more casualties by crashing their ship into the enemy. As a result, Kane gets injured, as does Tonbokiri during the fight against the enemy warrior, trying to assassinate the minister. Seeing this, Konosuke teleports Unit 2 back to the Citadel. The Citadel's where the Dimensional Warriors live and rest when they aren't on a mission. Once the group arrives, their medical team quickly attends to Kane and Tombakiri. Kane manages to get up after some rest. However, Tombakiri still didn't wake up despite Saniwa doing her best. Kane's frustrated and annoyed with himself and begins withdrawing from the group for a few days. As much as Yoshiyuki and Harakawa tried to cheer him up, he kept blaming himself for what happened on the mission. To his consolation, Saniwa told him that despite everything, there have been no changes in history, so they had completed the task successfully. The news didn't satisfy Kane, who wonders if they saved history. As for Tombakiri, he managed to wake up after several days, and his companions visited him while he rested to recover. On the other hand, Saniwa gathers Unit 1, presumably to be the best of all, to send them on a critical mission against the Retrograde Army. Saniwa sends Yamanbagari Kunihiro and his guys back in time to deal with the Retrograde Army and their next plan. The group's conformed of Kurihiro, their commander, Higekiri, Hizumaru, Mitsuyo, Mikazuki, and Honbami. When the group arrives, they find the enemy looking to attack several innocent people. Unit 1 deals with them quite easily, displaying their great power. They had to find an unknown assassin of the enemy troops. After researching for quite some time, Honbami finds the killer, a demon from the enemy troops who's not only incredibly strong but can also summon allies. The demon's ability means the group must work together to kill all the enemies he can summon. After finishing them off, Kunihiro and Mikazuki, the most experienced members of the squad, face off against the demon. After an arduous and challenging battle, Mikazuki defeats the monster so that history isn't in danger. When they beat the demon enemy, Unit 1 stays longer to help the people affected by the Retrograde Army. They distribute food, rebuild houses, and perform practical tasks. Meanwhile, at the Citadel, Kane fully recovered and ponders the point of saving history. Harakawa interrupts him to ask him how he's feeling, and Kane tells him he's better. They both begin to talk about what it means to save history. Later, Kane visits specific points of the Citadel to speak with his team members and form Unit 2 again. To Kane's surprise, they all agree to put the team back together, as everyone considers him a great leader. While they're meeting, Konosuke arrives with the news that Unit 2 will have a new mission. Kane talks to Saniwa and he gives him the mission data. With the intel, Kane and his team embarked on a new journey to save history from the Retrograde Army. The group's next trip takes them to a time known to Yoshiyuki since he lived it as a weapon. The team's mission was to escort a man named Sakamoto, Yoshiyuki's former master. They were to accompany him to specific locations and protect him from harm. But the story presents slight variations due to the Retrograde Army and the multiple temporary trips made throughout the year. These variations cause Sakamoto to be injured and chased by a crowd instead of calmly reaching the place he was supposed to go. Thanks to Yoshiyuki, who arrives to save his former master, Sakamoto manages to get out alive and keep the story intact. After Yoshiyuki protects Sakamoto, they talk for a while and he suggests he runs away and live a high life. Then they said their goodbyes while the others were finishing off the remaining members of the Retrograde Army to end the mission. Once it's over, Yoshiyuki prefers to go back with his friends to wait for Saniwa's new orders. As the story has changes that could directly affect Sakamoto's life, Saniwa orders them to continue protecting him. Meanwhile, Kane and Harakawa discuss the possibilities of seeing his former masters since he was at the same time as Sakamoto. Kane clarifies that they shouldn't interfere with his former master's affairs or change the course of history on a whim. This speech fails to convince Harakawa fully, and he accepts what Kane says doubtfully. After spending several days watching Sakamoto, they realize that he suddenly disappeared, but thanks to Yoshiyuki, they find him quickly. He's in a park admiring the trees and nature while Harakawa finds and watches him again. On his part, Yoshiyuki finds Kane's master, who belonged to the clan that wanted to assassinate Sakamoto. The group started to watch the situation thinking the story could have changed, so these two encountered and ended badly. Although the boys prevent them from meeting, Kane sees his former master, making him sad because he knows he'd die soon. Seeing this, Harakawa begins to doubt Kane's decision and disappears after confronting him. Knowing Horikawa has escaped, the group thinks he wants to intervene in history to save his master. Meanwhile, they continue to take care of Sakamoto in case something happens. For this, Kane has to look for his disciple while his companions watch Sakamoto. Kane starts looking for Harakawa along with Yoshiyuki, while Kane talks a bit about his past. He claims to understand Harakawa's pain, but is unwilling to ignore his orders to save his master. He also talks about his parting with his master and how he fought on his side when he died. In the end, they both tried to find Harakawa without any success. On the other hand, the boys discover that Sakamoto leaves his residence on his way to another district as history dictates. But another alteration took effect since the house began to burn a few hours after Sakamoto had left home. This incident wasn't supposed to happen, and thanks to this, many innocent people died in the fire. As a result, an angry Kane defeats a bunch of members of the Retrograde Army, blaming them for the catastrophe. In the middle of the fire, Harakawa appears and tries to convince Kane to save his former master. However, true to his principles, Kane refuses and even tries to kill Harakawa, so he doesn't interfere with the story. But his feelings towards him don't let him hurt him. At the end of the fight, Harakawa gets lost in the mist to fulfill what he had promised. After Harakawa leaves, never to return, Kane is heartbroken that he didn't dare to kill his disciple and that he'd change history to his benefit. Yoshiyuki tries to comfort Kane, but Saniwa then tells Kane they can still save history. To accomplish this, Saniwa takes them 3 years into the future to the battle where Kane's former master dies. Saniwa brings them to this point as the Retrograde Army seeks to change history and makes Kane's master survive. However, Kane, accepting that the death of his master is inevitable, decides to stop the enemy. Once they reach the place of battle, an overwhelming number of enemies appear. But these were no match for Yoshiyuki and Kane. To ensure victory, Saniwa summons more members of Unit 1 as reinforcements. Meanwhile, Kane looks for his former master to ensure that history doesn't change and to give him a small farewell. When he arrives at his office, Kane enters and checks the objects around, remembering everything that made him feel at home. Suddenly, he hears footsteps heading towards him, and Kane hides while watching. He then is frozen to see his former master enter the office with Harakawa. Kane is surprised to see them together, and then Harakawa notices him. He goes outside to talk to him. Harakawa tells him he joined his former master's party to change history so Kane could fight with him in his last battle. This reasoning didn't persuade Kane, and he went to talk to his former master so that the story would be as it had to be. Harakawa felt a bit discouraged, but he also realized that if Kane managed to grow up and leave everything he once held dear to fulfill his mission, he could too. When Kane fixed the problem his disciple caused, he says goodbye to his former master on his way. After saying goodbye, Kane returns to the battlefield to help his comrades in the fight against the Retrograde Army. Upon arrival, he realized that the enemy has multiplied its troops. However, the warriors were willing to die to protect history. With more enemies appearing, Saniwa decided to send Tonbakiri, Yagin, and Tsurumuro to help in the fight. He sends Mikazuki, and even Horikawa shows up to help the group. He meets Kane again and tells him he already understands his feelings for his master. Once the heroes completely wipe out the enemy army, the story continues as expected. Kane and his boys declare victory once and for all. And that was Katsugeki Season 1 recap. If you enjoyed this recap, remember to hit that sub, click the like button, and comment down below to let me know what you think of the series. I'll see you in the next video.